Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Decouple podcast, where we explore the science and technologies that can decouple human well-being from its ecological impacts, and the politics that can make decoupling possible. Welcome back to Decouple. Today I'm joined by Adam Blazowski, who is a founder of the Polish Pragmatic environmentalist group FOTA. He is a software engineer, manager, author, and activist with over 15 years working in energy efficiency, smart cities, renewable energy, and advocacy for tech-agnostic decarbonisation. Adam, welcome to Decouple.
Hi, Chris. It's really good to be with you.
All
I've
right.
been listening to your podcast since episode number 3, so I'm a little bit starstruck.
Oh, wow. Okay. You're a veteran. That's great. So Adam, I like to ambush people with the self-introduction. One of the reading through your bio and learning a bit about you, I understand that you helped to save 13 million cubic meters of natural gas from being burned in Belgium and the Netherlands. I'm interested in that, but yeah, tell us a little bit more about yourself. Give our listeners a better idea of who you are, your motivations, what you're all about.
Okay. So my name is Adam Blazowski and I live in Poland. This is Central Europe, in the city of Wrocław, which is about 300 kilometers east from Berlin and 400 kilometers west from Warsaw. And for the last 15 years, I'm educated as a software engineer, and I spent most of my professional life in software, in energy efficiency, in buildings, basically making sure that we can keep the comfort of the building as people want it, but we can consume as little energy as possible. And I've been really proud with my work because it really gave me a feeling of purpose and achievement that we could. Our projects are mainly used in Belgium and Netherlands and primarily focus on gas.
So is this like smart metering or smart thermostats or things like that?
And basically optimization of the heating systems and procedures and visualization reporting and all of this ISO 50001 norm is leading you to just consume less, which is possible, and it really you can make a lot of money on it.
Yeah, and I think it's something that's a little bit neglected by elements of the eco-modernist community, which tend to just be like, it's all about the energy, like no limits, grow. And I do think that there's a certain balance that can be achieved, not only to sort of bring in a wider audience who are concerned about things like energy efficiency, but just, we talk about transitioning to decoupling technologies, the need to build a lot of clean energy infrastructure. But, we do have a tight timeline that's going to take a lot of time to achieve. And in the meantime, I think energy efficiency that doesn't sort of stymie human flourishing is a really essential part of the picture. So it's good to have someone on with that perspective and background.
Energy efficiency only can get you as far.
Yes.
It cannot get you to zero. And sometimes there is a Jevons paradox which talks about the fact that you can increase your energy efficiency but still consume more.
Yeah.
But it does not mean we should not go for energy efficiency. If an average home in Central Europe, in Poland, consumes about 4 times less electricity than an American home, then maybe there are reasons for it, and maybe it's a good reason to ask why.
Yeah.
And how come it's like that? Yeah.
Yeah, we have a famous Canadian academic named Václav Smil who talks a lot about how the automobile has become much more energy efficient, but we don't drive 1-ton cars anymore. We drive 2 or 3-ton SUVs and minivans and things like that. So that's like the Jevons paradox at work. I guess another metric that I've been very interested in recently, and I'm going to be having a returning guest on, Edgardo Sepulveda, but this metric of the cost of the abatement of 1 ton of carbon. And I think that's an interesting spin on the efficiency thing as well. So what is the cost of, upgrading insulation and windows and everything in a building versus, preserving existing nuclear, building new nuclear, building other clean tech. I think that's a really essential metric that's been avoided as we just obsessively focused on things like levelized cost of electricity or other things. That cost of the abatement of a ton of CO2 is something I'm planning to really dig into.
Every time I hear people talking about capturing CO2 from the air and wondering how expensive it is and when it's going to be cheap enough. Well, I can tell you, as long as not burning the fossil fuels is cheaper, it's not cheap enough.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I mean, and we just did an episode on this as well, but I mean, burning the fossil fuel brings all kinds of benefits, obviously, with environmental externalities, but sequestering it is just a pain in the ass. I mean, it's energy intensive, infrastructure intensive, et cetera. But we're here to talk today about Poland, about your group FOTA. Am I pronouncing that all right?
It's FOTA for climate.
FOTA for climate. Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about this organization. I understand you're one of the founders. Give me the origin story and your rationale. What are your kind of guiding principles in this organization?
FOTA is a foundation. It's an NGO, non-profit, and we started this as a group of friends who happen to be experts in their own individual domains: nature conservation, energy markets, reptiles, biology, whatever. We have herpetologists, so we have it all. We have people who do environmental assessments of wind power, for example, and or people who do assessments of any kind of investments. So these are people who are really very close to nature and very close to nature conservation, with a scientific background, usually, or work experience. And what really brought us together was, I think, an overwhelming feeling of frustration of the climate change looming, how it affects the biodiversity. People have legs, people can move, but trees don't. If the moment that the climate is warming, the trees will just die. They will not move northward. Yeah. So
and in Poland, I mean, to what degree are you guys feeling the impacts of climate change? I'm aware of further northeast, the big wildfires in Siberia. But I guess a two-part question, like, are you guys feeling much in terms of the impacts of climate change? And number two, like, how big of a concern is it throughout Polish society? Is this, like you talk to people in the UK and it's really become a front and center issue, I think, because of the activism of groups like Extinction Rebellion, I think, and I guess there's probably other reasons as well, but it's become a real, important voter issue and things like that. Is that the case in Poland?
It is becoming a case, and it's more and more becoming a topic on the left and on the right. So it's no longer left-right divide. There are green conservatists, and there are obviously the eco left that is talking about this. So it's becoming to be an open, accepted fact. Well, we don't get winters anymore. I remember winters when there was minus 20, minus 25 degrees in the winter, and I was walking to my school in the mountains, and it was really freezing. Well, we don't get that anymore.
Right.
So that's one thing. Poland is pretty dry. We are in the Central European plain, and it's mostly a flat country. If you don't get enough rain, that it pretty quickly becomes a step. So water is an issue. So any kind of agriculture, water conservation, retention is really a priority over here. And we get heat waves now. So it's no longer the climate of France. It's more continental climate. So it can be pretty hot in the summers. So people do notice this, and people do start talking about it.
Yeah. So Adam, let's talk a little bit more about again this origin story. I've been really interested to not only kind of do profiles around the world of energy systems in various countries and the status of nuclear in particular in those countries, but also getting to know the various emerging, I'm not sure what to call them, pragmatic environmentalist organizations around the world. As you know, I think these are very new phenomena, most kind of coming into existence probably within the last 3 or 4 years. And I'm very interested in, like I said before, sort of the ideology seems like too strong of a word, but I guess the kind of guiding principles and the tactics, because I think there's a lot to sort of learn. Decouple's famously listened to in over 90 countries around the world. So I really see Decouple as an opportunity to sort of share best practices and learn from each other as pragmatic environmentalists from around the world. So let's dive a little bit more into FOTA for climate. And you know, just to keep it entertaining for people, I heard there was an element of controversy at COP24, which I guess took place in Poland. You guys participated, and what happened?
So we started in 2018 as a group of friends. I think 2018 was really the year of new climate movements. This is when a lot of new things showed up and appeared, especially in Europe. And there was a COP24 in Katowice that was about 200 kilometers from our city. And there was a huge international climate march organized by the local activists. And they said, well, come with whatever banners you want. Please come with whatever is on your heart. Please bring machines to make noise, and let's shout about the climate. And we thought to ourselves, okay, then we go. And we really think we should go for a tech agnostic approach to energy systems, that we need to also include nuclear. So we printed a huge banner with the logo of nuclear power and a wind turbine and a tree, and we just went there and ended up badly because we've been kicked out by the organizers, and they called the police and we had to leave. We were also attacked by really physically attacked by a German anti-nuclear organization that was also there, and it was really unpleasant situation. We were a bit shocked because we didn't expect it.
This is really interesting for me because you know, and I'm not sure in Poland, but in North America to a degree, in Canada, but mostly in the States, you see a lot of like demonstrations and counter demonstrations, right? And I mean, nasty stuff, right? You see kind of white supremacists, and then the community and like Antifa groups will come and you know, show them that they're not welcome in the community. And I imagine that you guys have pretty decent freedom of expression laws emerging as you have out of a pretty tyrannical political system.
It was peaceful, but not negotiable.
but this demonstration was on public property.
Yes. Yeah.
And they still, and the police,
it was international,
and the police still removed you. Like, that just, to me, that seems illegal, or at least immoral.
No. In Poland, the organizer takes a decision, and the police will follow his decision. So he said, well, to guarantee the safety for everybody, this German organization was really aggressive and like
physically, or what was they physically, or?
Yeah, it was in one moment it was physical, so it was pretty tense.
Yeah,
I would say they forgot they're not in Germany anymore, but
you know, yeah.
But it was interesting, and for us it was a revelation that we realized how much of an issue this is for many people, and how difficult it is for many people to accept that we need all clean power sources.
I mean, not to take too low of a blow at the Germans, but they have the bad history in Eastern Europe. And actually, there was an interesting news story some time ago of a German politician justifying relying on Russian gas as a way to sort of pay back its crimes in Eastern Europe and in Russia. So
you can imagine these kind of comments are not well received in Central Europe.
I can very much imagine that. Okay, so I mean, you guys got kicked out of this climate march. That was, it sounds like a profound moment for you. I understand that there was a Polish excursion into Germany to the Phillipsburg nuclear power plant. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So we came back home, and we thought, okay, we have to do something about it. I think this is such an important issue that we have to include nuclear in the debate, and we need to do something. So the decision was, let's do an open letter to the German government from the Polish scientists and climate activists to stop the phase out of nuclear energy in Germany. Just one nuclear reactor, Phillipsburg, was producing more electricity than, I think, 2/3 of all wind turbines in Denmark.
Yeah.
And it
I
was
think
closing in 2019,
yeah.
December.
It's very interesting, this kind of I find in a lot of kind of green thinking, there's this regionalism associated. So, you know, there's these ideas of like, well, we can shut down this nuclear plant and we're going to, you know, offset it, for instance. That's not so much what I'm talking about, but, you know, like shutting down a source of clean energy in any place affects the rest of the world. Climate doesn't understand borders. Air pollution doesn't understand borders. And so I'm guessing part of your motivation was climate, but also does Poland suffer? I mean, you guys burn a ton of coal as well, but the German coal emissions blow into Poland. Is that an issue? Or?
They blow both ways. So
Right.
so we are not proud of Polish energy mix, but it is what it is. But the carbon budgets are common and the planet is common, and we have to start talking about this. So we thought, okay, this is something we can start talking about. Maybe we can help some people in Germany who wants to also prevent this. Let's do these signatures. And we collected more than 100 signatures from really top climate scientists, IPCC contributors, biologists, people who work with an environment, PhDs, professors, and we just collected all this and we sent it to German embassy and we delivered to them. But that was also, of course, not everything, because we thought, okay, then we have to do something about Phillipsburg, because Phillipsburg is closing down. It's really a wonderful nuclear power plant, low carbon electricity. How can it be closed? So I just found a German YouTuber. I really recommend him, Simon Prus.
Mm-hmm.
And I called him like 3 months earlier. It's not easy because you don't know people on the other end. You don't know who they are.
Mm-hmm.
So I just found a YouTuber who was really very reasonable and well presenting the topic. And I called him and I said, well, I don't know, guys, what you're planning, but we are coming.
Yeah.
So we are going to be there. So luckily, the German team was also organized, and we made an online charity. We collected like €3,000 in 2 weeks. Just ordinary Polish people putting money and saying, hey, this is important, you should do this. And we just went. We took a bus and we went 800 kilometers and we protested together with our German friends.
Mm-hmm. I think
the moment we arrived, I think this is something really emotional, because when we arrived in Germany and we arrived at the moment of the protest, we came with the bus. We came a little bit too early. And there it was, 20 Polish people, men and women, came almost 1,000 kilometers with banners. And what we saw was more than 300 anti-nuclear activists who were finishing their own protest, or they were actually celebrating,
right,
playing Bob Marley, drinking champagne, and our hearts really sank at that moment. There's like 20 of us. There is 300 of these people, and we were really happy the police was there. Because
have your previous experience. Was there any interaction, or they were leaving, you were arriving?
It was decent. We were just standing on the side and waiting for them to finish. But it was really personal, and for us it was a formative experience, because these people really celebrated. They were really happy. They enjoyed it. Most of them, almost all of them, were in the age of my parents. So 60,
interesting.
70.
Yeah.
There was almost no young people among them.
Right.
So it was really, really something special. Yeah.
And did they have climate messaging, or was it purely kind of anti-nuclear messaging on their placards?
It was clearly anti-nuclear. It was a message about how happy we are that this is finally gone.
Mm-hmm.
And we worked all our lives to achieve this, and finally it happens. So finally this is happening, and this perspective for us, for Polish people who We live in a country that has 70% coal.
Yeah.
We would do anything to have this kind of plant in Poland.
Right.
You know, we make jokes that Polish people just buy this old Passat and take it to Poland, and it gets a second life.
Right.
we can get the same thing with the nuclear.
The Passat is the Volkswagen, like
yeah, Volkswagen
Volkswagen,
Passat. Yeah, it's a
yeah.
typical Polish 20-year-old machine that lives
just
forever.
Keeps going. Yeah,
because it's German built. Yeah.
Again, like speaking of the tactics and strategy, you know, in Canada, you know, we have now a national level pro-nuclear group called Canadians for Nuclear Energy, and it's been interesting sort of doing activism and organizing and communications just that are kind of pro-nuclear but not tied to anything versus trying to defend like a local plant at risk of closure. In our case, that's almost certainly going to be closed. And you know, when you tie it into this existing piece of infrastructure, which is just so important to climate action, which is so important to air quality, it takes on a very different poignance, right? And it really, I think, speaks to the hypocrisy of a lot of the traditional environmental NGOs. You know, and the closure of Indian Point is just such a textbook example of that, where again you had groups like the National Resource Defense Council literally dancing on the grave of this plant that produced more. I mean, one of its 2 reactors that was just shut down produced more power than all of the wind and solar fleet in New York. So I mean, it's hard. It's hard to see in this day and age, and you really see that the anti-nuclearism is the primary drive of these groups, it feels like.
Yes. But also they have a conflict of interest often. Yeah, that's also possible that they have a conflict of interest.
Tell me more about that.
Well, as I understand, some of the organization are vested in closing of the nuclear. So it's probably a broad topic, but it does happen that they benefit from it. Yeah, so it is possible, and it's a normal thing. It's in Germany when Nord Stream gas pipeline from Russia was built. One of the big NGOs, environmental NGOs, 10 years ago, it got funded by Gazprom with 10 million euro, and
oh wow,
they didn't accept it into the organization, but the CEOs of the organizations, they founded a new organization, and they got the money from Gazprom, 10 million euro, and officially they should be working on ensuring the quality of Baltic Sea and ensuring that there is no leak of gas and protecting the nature because of the new gas pipeline. But the CEOs of I think it was German WWF and Bund, these people just started a new organization and they took the money from Gazprom.
Yeah,
it's a public information. It's not a secret.
Yeah, no, I mean it's very fascinating seeing again these upstart groups like your own and like ours here in Canada and others just emerging around the world. And just, you know, I was talking to the folks at Nuclear New York, and I mean these are groups that are just scraping by on a shoestring budget, mostly from their own members or very small donations from just average citizens. And you know, I hate to say what we're up against, but it sort of is true. I mean, groups like NRDC, for instance, that are really pursuing what I would consider to be a very anti-climate, anti-environment goal, or anti-clean air goal as well. That's a group that apparently has assets of 200 million. So it's a real sort of David and Goliath struggle. So anyway, thanks for that introduction to your group. I'm not sure. I think we should talk a little bit more about the underlying philosophy. You mentioned that the group is very much, I think tech agnosticism is something you've talked about, and the rationale being to preserve nature. So tell me more about the way in which you frame your organization.
So the name FOTA, it translates. It has different translations, but one of them is followers of the Anthropocene.
Okay. Yeah.
If you played the game Fallout, that there are followers of the apocalypse.
Yeah.
So we all know this game, and it's a cult title. But followers of the Anthropocene, it means we see the Anthropocene happening. We see how it affects nature and how it affects biodiversity. And we are also frustrated by the inability of the big NGOs to get out of the dogmatic mindset and really start thinking pragmatically about nature conservation.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, this frustration grew and grew. So we decided, okay, we have to do it ourselves. We never got any money from any nuclear lobby, despite what our anti-nuclear friends think. We just did it ourselves with our own budgets, with our own, all of us, we have day jobs. But we thought this is important. This is something we have to do. This is something, it's right now that we have to act. We have to talk. We have to make this happen.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how it all started. That we were looking for pragmatic solutions to the conflict between climate, the nature, and the human, and we look for evidence-based solutions. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about the kind of the Polish context from which your group is emerging. I understand coal you were mentioning is something like 80% of electricity generation. Yeah. And you guys only have 1% coming from hydro, I understand. So you don't really have that as a big option.
No hydro. If you want hydro in Poland, then you probably need to flood 15 villages, 2 cities, and at least 2 Catholic sanctuaries. And it's
not going to happen.
that is not happening.
Very Catholic country. That's not going on.
Yeah. So this will not happen.
And I mean, I think, you know, I'm very interested in sort of the geopolitics of energy. And it's very curious to me that your next door neighbor, Ukraine, is about 50% nuclear powered, again, despite the Chernobyl incident. And a lot of that seems to be related to issues of energy security. I think your coal is kind of a tool for energy security.
Yeah.
You guys get some gas from Russia. You have huge shale reserves, maybe. So let's just talk a little bit about.
Not anymore. We have them. They are huge, but they are impossible to get out of the ground.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more just about that. I've kind of did a bit of research and given a bit of a summary, but tell me a little bit more about the underlying dynamics of at least electricity in Poland.
I think it's fair to say that Poland built its prosperity, and it's an industrialized nation, and we built it on coal.
Yeah.
So we should not deny it. And now we have to move away from it. And the question is, what do we replace it with? And of course, there is always geopolitical tension. If you live between Germany and Russia, there are better places to live, historically speaking, than between these 2 countries. So we really want to be secure and independent in that matter. And a lot of people pick it up as an important factor. Yeah? It's not only climate, we also need to be reliant on ourselves. A little bit like France in the 50s, 60s.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it was interesting. I was looking at a survey from the Polish Energy Ministry about attitudes towards nuclear in Poland. And at least in this survey, I think 59% of people were supportive, unlike France, where the majority of young people don't realize it's a low carbon emission source.
It's different.
Most do in Poland. Yeah. And there was big support, I think, because of that energy security element.
And for some people, it's important to do something just the opposite from the Germans.
Right.
I don't follow this line of argument, but I acknowledge that for many people, this is a valid argument. But also, we live in a country that is powered by coal, and people see it, and people know what it means. The air quality, and it's actually not from the electricity generation, but from low emissions from heating houses. Air quality is pretty bad in winter, and we all know that we have to get away from it.
And is it as bad as the German brown coal? Is it a lot of lignite coal? Like I think Germany has the distinction of the largest open pit mines.
We have both brown coal and the hard coal, and a lot of these plants are already quite old, as they were built during communist times. So they are going to die anyway.
Yeah.
There is no future for much coal in Poland. In the 90s, we had more than 400,000 miners. Right now, it's about 80,000. So we
Wow.
already reduced quite a lot, improved in efficiency, but still there is a very strong lobby from the mining industry that really hates nuclear.
Hmm.
And it's traditionally it's been really nuclear power is the enemy of coal.
Yeah, that's
But
true.
now it changes because people realize, okay, you're going to shut down Bełchatów, which is the largest European coal power plant. What are you going to replace it with?
Yeah.
Wind turbines? No. It's a very good location for a nuclear power plant.
Hmm.
And incidentally, you need almost the same kind of qualifications
Right.
to run one and the other.
Yeah.
So people are starting to see it as a savior technology. Yeah?
Hmm. I'm curious why Poland doesn't have any. It's like doesn't have any nuclear when Ukraine is 50% nuclear powered. Can you explain the history around that? Why that is?
Just to interrupt, we have a research reactor, Maria,
Okay.
and it's not the mother of God, it's the Marii Skłodowska-Curie. Marie Curie, so she's famously, she was born in Poland, so we have a research reactor in her name. And
Right. Okay.
Poland is creating a lot of medical isotopes, iodine and others.
Mm.
Anyway, we did have plans for nuclear power plant. And it was started in the 1980s during the communist rules. And after the fall of communism, the project was abandoned.
Mm-hmm.
At the moment when we already paid 40% of the costs, and then we paid on top of it 30% in penalties for the unrealized project. So we lost like 70% of the money and then we didn't get anything.
Wow.
That was the moment when the communists were falling apart. The reactor was Soviet, WWER, but the power of the public protest was too strong and the government just gave up. And
Was this like general public protest against the communist
yes,
regime, the solidarity movement?
yes, it was solidarity movement, which coincidentally was built by in large extent by coal miners.
Interesting.
So so they had a lot of interest in this not happening. But also, I think people were really tired of the communists. You have to remember that the transition in Poland was peaceful. So there was a round table and negotiations, and
Right.
after Poland, the other countries followed, and they just talked about this and how to manage this. And it's interesting historical fact that the communists during these discussions, because we have transcripts, they were talking about climate change. They were talking about CO2 and the need to phase out coal.
This is in the 80s.
Yes, it was 1989. Yeah.
Okay.
But the solidarity movement and really people who were later become the luminaires of the green movement, they were at this table really countering the communism and saying, no, we have to invest in energy efficiency. We have to invest in coal. We have to invest in gas. No nuclear.
Yeah,
So,
I find that fascinating, the underlying politics
but at
behind
that
that.
moment, nothing that the communists were saying would be accepted because they were going out. So it doesn't matter if they were right or wrong. People just were tired. And you remember, it was 4 years after Chernobyl, so people were really scared. It was a
Right.
PWR reactor. It was not RBMK,
Mm-hmm.
but still, the hysteria was too strong. And interesting, Slovakia, just south of Poland, was in the same situation, but they didn't abandon the project.
Mm-hmm.
They finished it in 1998, and they
Interesting.
have much cleaner coal power right now.
Right.
If you look at the electricity map, Slovakia, south of Poland, is much more yellow or green than Poland.
Poland's kind of as close as you get to black, it seems like.
Yeah, only Estonia is worse.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting.
So the project was scrapped and not finished. Yeah.
Right. Right. I mean, I also wonder if if the Soviets were kind of seeing that they were losing control of Poland, whether it would make sense to make a large investment in building nuclear power plants in this.
I think it
Probably.
wasn't.
Yeah.
The investment was from Polish government, so they
Okay.
didn't really care.
It wasn't related
The
to.
Soviet Union was falling apart on itself.
Right.
It was not until 15 years later that Rosatom really started to get a hang of the things and trying to return. But at that time, everything was falling apart.
Right. So you were mentioning that there's been a revival of interest in nuclear energy in Poland. I was reading that I'm not sure if these targets predate Fukushima or come afterwards, because I know that Fukushima really arrested the so-called nuclear renaissance. But there was a target, or there may still be a target of, I think, 6 to 9 gigawatts electric, something like 33% of Polish electricity to come from nuclear by, I'm not sure what the date is. Can you tell me a little bit more about those targets, whether they still stand?
Well, in 2009, the Prime Minister promised we will have first criticality in 2020. But then again, Fukushima happened and there was nobody really who could build it. So we were really blocked by not having anyone being ready to build it, because Slovakia, Czech Republic, Hungary, they have Russian technology, and it's a pretty good reactor. You have to admit it. But a Russian technology would never sell in Poland. So for political reasons, it's out. It will never happen. So what we could have the Koreans, we could have the Americans or the French, now the Chinese. So it didn't happen because there was just not enough build out in the world. And now it's changing. Americans are preparing an offer. We have 2 locations selected, and there is a plan that is accepted by the government. So now we were really waiting for the offers, and we have to see the financing. We want to take 51% of stake from the country, from the government, and 49% should be offered as a financing by the company who wants to provide it. So we will see who is making an offer.
And we've been talking a lot on decouple recently, despite it not being a strong point of mine in terms of the economics, but looking at regulated and unregulated markets. What are the impacts on Poland? Poland, I understand, is deregulated.
Yeah.
How does that impact the potential for the funding of these projects? You mentioned a 51% stake. Is it like a government utility that's planning on bringing these reactors online, or is there some mix of financing? What are the impacts of that deregulation?
I would say the current European setup is not making it easier. Mm-hmm. So there is a huge conflict in Europe about the taxonomy for sustainable financing.
Right.
And historically, the Greens do everything they can to exclude nuclear from it. Mm-hmm. A couple of weeks ago, there was an amazing report by JRC, Joint Research Council. It's like the top scientific body of the European Commission, who was really in favor of nuclear and say, yeah, you have to include it in the taxonomy. If you're serious about technological agnostic approach, you have to put it in. And there is a huge fight in Brussels right now to keep it away. Mm-hmm. So up to an extent that the anti-nuclear organizations are ready to sink the whole taxonomy just to block nuclear by any way possible. And this is important because the cost of capital is everything in nuclear.
Yeah.
So if you are able to exclude nuclear from the taxonomy, it will have to borrow money that is much more expensive. It will make it more expensive, and it's self-propelling situation. So it's not making it easier, but there are ways to make it. Hinkley Point was started, and then immediately Greenpeace sued together with the government of Austria.
The government of Austria.
Yes.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
There are three: Germany, Austria, and Luxembourg. There are 3 countries that are really, really very anti-nuclear. Mm-hmm. The others are not so much. And they immediately sued to the highest court, and they lost. So Hinkley Point really
on what basis did they sue? I'm trying to understand that.
They sued that you cannot give public support to any energy system. So basically, Europe wants to build everything with commercial money. They
That's so
don't like
interesting.
public support for projects, yeah, because
But they
will
don't mind
say,
subsidies.
yeah, the subsidies are skewing the market, and it's an ideological position. Okay, if we are rescuing ourselves from climate change, why should we really care about competition on the market? Yeah,
So if we're going to rescue ourselves, it has to be because of the private sector with
yeah.
subsidies from the ratepayer, but not from the actual state itself. That's
It's
very
okay
interesting.
to subsidize renewable energy, but it's not okay to subsidize other low carbon sources like nuclear. Is that fair? Is that reasonable? It's debated. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it is possible, but it's not making it easy. Yeah? And famously, I think one of the MEPs from Brussels, he said, nuclear cannot be part of taxonomy because a German retired person cannot imagine that his money will ever be invested in nuclear. So the retirement funds should never invest money in nuclear because it will never be accepted by a German citizen. Yeah? So
Wow.
this affects all of Europe. So if Germans don't agree to this, everybody else needs to agree to this, and that's what we want to change.
Yeah,
That's
I'm planning on doing a show dedicated to the EU green taxonomy. And I mean, it feels like a game of ping pong or Wimbledon where you're just going like this because it's being included, it's not being included, it's being included, it's not being included.
Yeah, but the European system is extremely difficult and complex. But but once you get a hold of the stakeholders, then you start realizing, okay, who's where, and as long as the European Commission is the governments, they are pro nuclear, I would say. But the Parliament is full of representatives who have very different opinion, and there the real fight is in the Parliament. That
It's
is still
certainly
to come.
It certainly seems to be the countries of Eastern and Central Europe, particularly those that don't border onto any large body of water to do offshore wind, which is not the case with Poland, but that seem to be quite part of the pro-nuclear bloc within the EU. You know, France as well, though kind of bizarrely, they seem to be. They don't sing their praises well enough. They're not kind of proud of themselves.
The climate, they are a climate leader.
So in terms of the EU, there's this tension between these anti-nuclear countries like Germany, Luxembourg, Austria, and then these Central European countries that don't necessarily have access to water and therefore offshore wind, and they're really looking at nuclear as a vital tool for their decarbonization strategy. And it's interesting. What I'm wondering, I guess, is you mentioned that there might be a collaboration with the US. The various funding models that may or may not get around the limitations of the green taxonomy if it doesn't include nuclear. You know, there's a Candu reactor that's being funded bizarrely by the US in Romania. So does that, I think it's a development bank out of the US, which, you know, seems to be a bit of a geopolitical arm to, you know, as part of the ways to kind of contain Russia. There's all this geopolitics behind it, but does that factor into Poland and the financing of nuclear in Poland? Does that make it more attractive or less dependent on the EU green taxonomy?
Yes, so it would be a way to go around these limitations. Then okay, and really say to Brussels, okay, you don't want us to fund it. Okay, we will find it ourselves, and we will get Korean or American or maybe French, and we will finance it with different money. Yeah? So that's a way to go around it.
And with deregulation in Poland, is it possible for the government to you know get low interest loans for such a project, or has deregulation sort of scuttled that?
I think I would say my answer would be it's complicated. But if you look to Czechia will have a loan at 0% interest during the construction of the project. And afterwards, the interest will be 2%.
That changes everything.
Yeah, of course it does. But I said it's complicated because Czechia recently said that they cannot build a Russian reactor. And the reason was there was a huge scandal because when the war in Ukraine erupted, Czech factories producing ammo were exploded. And it turns out they were exploded by Russian spies. So the government of Czechia was really annoyed a couple of weeks ago, and they said, okay, Rosatom, you're out of it. You're not building our nuclear. So see, this is the this is the geopolitical factor, that it's just not money. It's not only money. Yeah, it's many other things. If a country is blowing up infrastructure in your country, you don't want them to build a nuclear power plant in your country.
Fair. That seems entirely reasonable.
Although it would probably work amazingly well.
And Rosatom seems to be the best at this stage anyway in bringing these projects to fruition.
But still, there are certain things that affect such decisions. And
absolutely,
just a couple of weeks ago, Czechia government said, no, Rosatom is out of it. You know? I don't know who's going to build it.
Fascinating. But yeah, that financing, I've never heard of that actually. I'm not sure. I have to do an episode on how China funds its nuclear projects. I understand basically, essentially, it's all state funded. But
if you ask me, if somebody would ask me how we do this, well, we have a time of a very high inflation. It's a really good moment to do big infrastructure projects.
Right.
And there is no better way to invest your retirement savings than in such a project. It's low carbon, it's preventing climate change, it's replacing coal, it's a long-term investment, but it's not allowed.
Yeah,
it's not allowed because of the taxonomy, and this has to change. If we are serious about climate change, Greta Thunberg says, listen to the scientists. Well, how serious are you about climate change? Because this is a very simple test. Are you willing to invest your retirement money into nuclear power plant? Are you serious enough?
So it's interesting, the largest operating nuclear facility in the world is in Ontario, in my backyard. And there's a joint ownership. It's a public-private partnership. Because of deregulation, we created a private kind of competitor, although the site is still publicly owned. But one of the main investors, I think the 40% stake, is from this group called OMERS, which is a municipal worker retirement fund. So I mean, that's certainly some pension funds have seen the light on that issue. You know, Adam, we'd had some interesting discussions going back many months ago. Listeners of this podcast will know that I am fairly skeptical of intermittent renewables, non-dispatchable renewables, wind and solar in particular. You know, I can see places where they have a marginal place, particularly in off-grid applications or before the arrival of larger infrastructure. But you know, you had a pretty nuanced conversation with me about this. You know, because when I'm thinking about wind, I'm sort of biased by my own backyard, where we're 60% nuclear, where we had a very clean electricity grid, and where we made the strategic decision not to refurbish one of our large plants that provides, you know, 3 gigawatts of power, but instead to embark on a sort of Germanization of Ontario. I joke we're the France of North America, and then we tried to Germanize. But that resulted in tens of billions of dollars being spent on renewables, which added almost nothing to our grid in terms of decarbonization, drove up costs a lot, and have led to us not investing in refurbishing that plant. We're going to lose about 20% of our nuclear capacity and a huge chunk of our clean energy. Wow. With a huge rise in emissions as a result. So I feel very strongly about wind in that context. But tell me about your guys' attitude, because FOTA, you know, that banner that you guys had at that climate march was an atom plus a windmill equals a tree. Basically, that was the equation on your banner. So give me your thoughts on wind energy, I guess, in particular. I think solar's a bit of a wash in northern latitudes. I know it doesn't perform well in Germany. I think Poland's probably similar. But tell me about your take on renewables. Is too big of a basket, so I'm going to confine you to intermittent weather-dependent renewables.
There is a very interesting study in France done by RTE about low carbon strategy for national low carbon strategy for France. Mm-hmm. And they are saying openly that installing variable renewables in France right now is going to increase CO2 emissions. It's a public study. It's an official government accepted national strategy. Until 2035, if they start scaling down nuclear, they are going to increase their emissions because you need gas to back up. I think I acknowledge that places like Ontario doesn't really need this. You are already decarbonized. Why would you change that? There are plenty of places in the world where they need to cut emissions. Ontario is not one of them in electricity sector. Same as France. They can improve a bit, but really they are already where we would like to be in 2050. Yeah? So there are many places on Earth where this doesn't really make sense to install wind power and variable renewable sources because it will increase CO2 emissions. But in countries like Poland, where we have 70% of coal, and really building nuclear fast and quick is not really happening. It's not going to be possible because there is nobody who can build it so fast and so quickly. You have to do whatever it takes to cut emissions. So there are some legitimate reasons why any kind of low carbon fuel saver technology should be used. Yeah? Mm-hmm. And our coal power plants are falling apart. A lot of them will die within a couple of years or a decade or two. We have to replace them with something. Are we going to replace them with gas? Okay, if we replace them with gas, then why not put also renewables to do fuel saver functionality and reduce the amount of gas that we burn? So it really very context specific depending on the region of the world. Mm-hmm. And that would be my take on it. Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been doing a lot of thinking about it because when we had that conversation earlier, it made me check some of my biases at the door. And again, I mean, in a context where you have any significant penetration of wind and you have nuclear, they really don't get along well. Wind blazes onto the grid, wants to sort of produce when it has good conditions. If there's a big penetration, you have to shut down your nuclear. Nuclear stays closed for.
My question is why should you shut down your nuclear?
Well, that was the situation.
It's a philosophical discussion. Why should they have a priority and not nuclear?
Exactly. I mean, that was our experience in Ontario. We used to allow wind first on the grid. It led to nuclear shutdowns.
It's nonsense.
Led to 3 days of nuclear going offline. The wind would die in that time. Gas would be burned
that doesn't make sense from a climate perspective.
For sure. So I mean, at any kind of significant penetration in a grid with nuclear, it becomes difficult, which I think raises this concept of, in the Polish context, wind as a transition energy source to a degree. Again, and because another concept that I've been thinking about a lot is decarbonization durability. We talk a lot about, and that's a big argument that's levered against nuclear is, hey, we have 8 years, 10 years, 12 years, whatever it is. It takes, that amount of time, certainly in the West, to build a nuclear power plant. Therefore we shouldn't build nuclear, but it's not that we need to just hit net zero as quickly as possible. It's also that we need to preserve that. And if we're, looking at analyses of, say, Mark Z. Jacobson's work, you see that you get into a position in 20 years where you need to replace an enormous amount of infrastructure. So it's just not durable.
What I'm worried about is a lock-in effect on gas.
Yeah.
Because you're building enormous capacity in gas that needs to be there because otherwise your lights will go out. And then what do you do with it? The German strategy says, oh, we are now building a lot of gas, but it's only going to be a couple hundred hours per year. And then in 10 years, it's not needed anymore. Oh, we'll see about that.
Right. Yeah, it's again, referencing back to Václav Smil, he this was a clip that I put on Twitter a while ago, but it was very influential for me. I mean, Germany had about 90 gigawatts of firm traditional power sources before embarking on the energy Wende. They added 110 gigawatts of capacity of basically wind and solar. They haven't retired that 90 gigawatts of firm power. They've shut down some nuclear. They've had to up some coal, of all things, and they're upping gas. So it's not from an investment perspective, it doesn't seem like a great strategy, because like you said, the coal's shutting down. You'd have to build wind, and then you'd have to build gas plants to back that. The gas plants have a 40-year lifespan. There's going to be an incentive to run those till their end. And there is that's I think why nuclear is so strongly opposed in the EU green taxonomy is the partisans of each side, particularly on the renewable side, see that an investment in nuclear is not great for them, not great for large penetrations of renewables. So I think there's a real tension.
Yeah, and here is a geopolitical aspect to it. Germany is a pretty wealthy country, and they can afford this. They can go for the 100% renewables because they have a lot of resources to really finance this, and they can just go over a hump and another hump and another hump just by speed alone and the budgets and the power. Poland is not such a wealthy country. We cannot afford the Energiewende.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the amount of money people pay per kilowatt hour in Germany at home, private people, in Poland, that would be a revolution. We cannot afford it. We have to have nuclear power to keep our power prices stable,
Mm-hmm.
because it will be a disaster for a country like Poland to go for the Energiewende. We cannot afford it.
Yeah. It's very interesting, kind of in a parallel universe, imagining that 500 billion euro investment that Germany's made in renewables, if they'd made it in nuclear. And I know that's politically completely unfeasible, but in our little thought experiment, in the way in which France exports a lot of its low carbon electricity, imagining Germany being this low carbon powerhouse, that was fueled by reliable nuclear that could fuel its neighbors and help them decarbonize, and be a kind of energy powerhouse in that regard. Because as I understand it now, with the greater variability in Germany, they're actually importing power sometimes from Poland. I know Sweden, since it shut down Ringgold's,
Germany was importing power from Poland yesterday.
80% coal power.
So we were exporting about 2 gigawatt.
Wow. Unbelievable. Strange.
On the 3rd of May, we were exporting to Sweden.
And I think that's a new phenomenon in Sweden, because they've shut down, not sure all of Ringgold's, but one of their reactors at least. I was talking with a friend there that said they'd had to fire up an old oil fueled generator, but also, yes, that there's increasing.
Technically, it didn't start, but it was ready to start if something was happening. But Polish exports to Sweden should be really an exception in case of emergency, but they are more and more often now. So,
wow.
So Polish coal can get a little bit of second life.
Yeah. Well, Adam, this has been a really fascinating conversation. I'm so glad that I had you on. Is there anything else that you wanted to add or talk about? Just want to give you a chance to promote FOTA some more. Any areas that we didn't cover that you wanted to?
I would say that for us, nuclear is not a goal on itself. So for us, it is a tool for achieving the goal, which is preservation of biodiversity. If you look at biomass burning, if you look at bioenergy, the amount of anthropopression that happens when you switch your economy to bioenergy is enormous. Think about wetlands, think about meadows and agricultural land that is currently not used and is storing a lot of carbon. If you put a new demand of nature on nature and you ask nature to provide you bioenergy, this will create pressure on these resources, because these unused land will be now much more profitable if it can provide bioenergy.
And bioenergy is a big deal in the EU, I understand. I've heard that the majority of renewable energy in Germany is actually from biomass. Is that
primary energy in Europe? A majority of renewable primary energy in Europe is biomass. Yeah?
Okay, so not electricity, but the whole shtick. Okay.
Especially Austria is really, they want to be innovative in burning forests. I don't know how can you be innovative in burning trees in 21st century, but apparently there is a strategy for this in Austria. But if you have a piece of land that is not used, maybe it's a wetland, then it's becoming much more interesting for you to make it dry, let all the carbon go into the atmosphere and start growing corn or start growing other energy crops. Right. And it's a disaster for the nature, because these unused lands are usually the last refuge for a lot of biodiversity.
Yeah.
So every time the green politicians are talking about working with bioenergy and increasing the bioenergy supply, you really have to ask, what are you talking about? Do you realize what you're advocating for, and how much biodiversity loss will happen because of this? So nuclear power here is key to save biodiversity.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. It's often something we quarrel with nuclear dwarfs, and as we call them, that's nuclear engineers who just see this as a technology as fun and good to have and interesting and worth doing. Well, no, for us, nuclear power is a key element to preserve biodiversity, and I think this and the climate argument should be the top reason why we are building nuclear power, because it's part of a much bigger picture.
Mm-hmm. And is bioenergy being added into the green taxonomy? Are there limits on it? Is it okay to log,
There is a
forests
huge
in the southern U.S. and transport them transatlantically on bunkers and burn them at Drax? Is that, I know that's in terms of the kind of carbon accounting, that's counted as carbon neutral, but in the green taxonomy in particular, is biomass and bioenergy suitable? Is it going to get
a
favorable
lot of
financing?
a lot of these big NGOs were advocating for this for many years, and the loophole that allows burning of the trees for bioenergy was actually pushed through the Brussels argument by Claude Turmes, which was a vice chair of Green Party in the European Parliament in 2009. He was instrumental in negotiating the original renewable energy directive, which included biomass. And now a lot of the big NGOs are changing, and they say, okay, now burning the trees is not really sustainable, and we should move away from it. So it's good. Yeah, it's better late than never. But really 10, 15 years ago, it was a way to get away from nuclear, that we can use forest in a sustainable way. Well, what does it mean to use forest in a sustainable way? Well, you just cut it every 40, 60 years and you plow it, and all the CO2 goes into the atmospheres, and you plant new trees.
And usually a
And
monoculture. Yeah.
yeah, it's tree plantations. It's not really a forest. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's an abomination to call it a forest. And so of course we need forest industry and we need wood, but burning it for energy is just a disaster. So it's really changing now, and even the big NGOs are changing their mind about this, and they say, hey, now this is maybe not a good idea. But in terms of heating, if you look to European strategy, there is a huge increase in biomass for heating in the future. So it's coming. It's coming, and it's a disaster that will hit our forests. A lot of them will die because of climate change. A lot of forests in Europe, Germany, Poland will not survive climate change and will just die. We have to plant new trees, and we have to do it with different species. But it's really a disaster for nature every time we choose a less energy dense technology.
Yeah.
And nuclear here is the top energy density by
I'm trying
far.
not to. I'm trying not to think in kind of absolutist terms or make too sort of black and white a vision of the world and its actors. But increasingly, I'm seeing environmental NGOs as actually being very anti-environmentalist and in a whole number of policies. And like you're mentioning, this green leader who got the got biomass included in that sort of bizarre carbon neutrality accounting. The opposition to nuclear energy. I mean, the dancing on the graves of nuclear plants as they close when they're taking more clean energy off the grid than the entire fleet of say, New York State. There's just so many examples across the board. And I think there's a few films like Planet of the Humans and Bright Green Lies that are starting to sort of, like, from the environmental perspective, starting to, I think, question some of because I think to a large degree, some of these environmental NGOs have just become public relations firms for the renewables industry. Their goal is not deep decarbonization; it's 100% renewables, for instance. And unfortunately, those critiques coming from within the green movement are often very Malthusian and just saying, "Well, it's all a wash. There's no hope. We need to just be anti-civilization." And the implication is everyone needs to die off, basically, to restore balance in nature. And I think that's where groups like yours are coming in and trying to strike that balance of being humanist and environmentalist?
I would say a lot of the key figures in this debate in the past, these are people who live in the cities and they get their food from the supermarket. They visit nature from time to time. They don't understand it. They are decoupled from nature.
Yeah.
And they just didn't have an idea about impacts of these policies.
Yeah.
But I work closely with people from Extinction Rebellion. Young people from Fridays for Future in Poland. They have a way different view than that. So there is really a revival coming in that sense. They are much more pragmatic, evidence-based, and I'm really hopeful for the future, because these other generations are passing away. They are passing the baton to new organizations, and they are much different, especially in Central Europe. So it's over. Yeah, for many of the anti-nuclear activists, it's over.
Well, Adam, I think that's a great place to leave it. We're coming up on the hour. It's been a real pleasure having you on. Thanks for shedding a light on Poland, Eastern Europe, FOTA for Climate.
Yes, please follow us on Facebook, FOTA for Climate. We are there, and on Twitter, and please support us if you can. And yeah.
And we are planning, we may miss the anniversary, but the decouple anniversary is May 27th. And we are planning to have some roundtable sessions, probably live Zoom events with a number of panelists. And one of the topics we're definitely looking at is exploring this emerging grassroots pragmatic environmentalism. So Adam, I think you'll be in one of the chairs on that panel. So it's great to have a chance to kind of meet you in advance of that.
Cannot wait.
Okay. All the best.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Okay. Bye for now. If you enjoyed the podcast, please make sure to subscribe, like, and review us on your podcast platform of choice. Until next time, guys.